Peace be with you, friends. On this 16th Sunday of Ordinary Time, our gospel is the ever-popular Martha Mary gospel. I say ever-popular with a tongue-in-cheek a bit because in my years of preaching, it's one that tends to bother people a lot. I've heard more and more criticisms, like, I don't know what's going on there, Father, explain that to me. So we'll get to Martha and Mary, but I want to focus first on reading number 1, which is really extraordinary from the book of Genesis. It's part of the cycle of stories about Abraham, and it's really weird. It's a weird story, and it's intrigued the tradition, both theological and artistic. In fact, one of the great icons of the Trinity is based upon this scene. And here's how it opens. The Lord appeared to Abraham by the terebinth of Mamre. So Abraham is there at the hot days by this tree, and he's in tent. And it said clearly, the Lord appeared to him. So God is making an appearance. Now, often in the Old Testament, God's presence is mediated by the angelic. But now listen. So he's sitting at the entrance to his tent, the day's growing hot. Looking up, Abraham saw 3 men standing nearby. When he saw them, he ran from the entrance of the tent to greet them. And bowing to the ground, he said, "Sir, if I may ask you this favor, let me, wait on you." All right. There's a lot going on here in this strange little story. So we've been told already the Lord's appearing. Well, how interesting that he appears in the form of 3 men or 3 angels. Why 3? Well, the Christian mind right away is intrigued by this, that God is somehow a play of 3 in 1. Looking up, he sees them, and then he runs to greet them. Now, this is in some ways the key to the whole story. When God appears to you, you don't sit around. You don't wait till tomorrow. You don't put it off because there's something more important. No, you run. See, when the Lord is coming into your life, you don't mess around. You don't compromise. You run to the Lord. But then, see, this is what I find so intriguing. He runs, he greets them, he bows. So, again, this is an acknowledgement of the divinity of what's appearing to him, bowing to the ground. That's the attitude of worship, okay? But this is what I find really interesting. He says, "Sir, if I may ask you this favor." Why? He's addressing 3 people, right? Why does he just say, "Sir"? There's a weird play here of plurality, the 3, and the 1. Because we're told the Lord appeared, so that's the one God, but he appears in terms of these 3 men whom Abraham worships, so that's appropriate to God. But then Abraham refers to them as sir, as one. Do you see now why the tradition saw in this scene something kind of weirdly interesting about the triune quality of God? But then Abraham ran, he bowed, and then, boy, does he get going. He's ordering his servants, "Let some water be brought. You may bathe your feet. Then rest yourselves under the tree. Now you've come this close to your servant. Let me bring you a little food. You may refresh yourselves. Afterwards, you may go on your way. Let me be of complete service to you." That's what he's saying. Now, Abraham is a prominent figure. He's a patriarchal figure. It was indeed part of ancient, Middle Eastern hospitality to be kind to visitors that come upon you, because in that desert culture, it was often a matter of life and death. Someone just comes upon you, they might have been wandering for days and they need food and drink. So that's understandable on the surface level. But the really interesting thing is the deeper level. If we are talking about a theophany here, a manifestation of God, what we're seeing in all the moves and gestures of Abraham is the right attitude. Go, don't delay. Oh, man, for our culture today, so secularized, and God, well, I guess if that's your thing. And no. If you're talking about God, you move, you act, and then you worship. That's the right attitude. You don't say, "Oh, God is, one interest I have among many. Oh yeah, I like baseball, I like politics, I like, my family, and I like God, and I like," no. The right attitude toward God is worship, and then radical service. Abraham is saying basically, look, my life is about you now. I'm not here to serve myself, make myself comfortable. No, my life is all about you. Speed, reverence, radical service. Does that make sense? Fellow believers? You know, do a little searching moral inventory of your own spiritual life. And you say, oh yeah, I believe in God. Oh yeah, God is so important to me. Are all these moves on display in your life? Do you act, you move when the Lord has come near? You worship him faithfully and regularly. Oh yeah, God's so important to me. When was last time you went to Mass? Oh, 10 years ago. Then you're not taking God seriously. Oh, God is the center of my life. Well, how often do you serve God? Show me exactly how you're giving your life to God. Oh, well, I don't really have time for all that. Then you're not serving God. Take Abraham here in the presence of these three men, angels, whatever you want to call them, as emblematic of the way we ought to be relating to God. All right, now, the church gives us this reading as a kind of propedeutic to reading the familiar Martha Mary story. And I think it does provide the right interpretive framework for this, again, controversial story. So we hear Jesus enters a village where a woman whose name was Martha welcomed him. She had a sister named Mary who sat beside the Lord at his feet, listening to him speak. Now, right away, so Abraham, he sees the Lord and he gets to it. He is completely devoted, dedicated. Well, that's the attitude of Mary in this story. That's what we're meant to see, is the Lord has come, Jesus. What do you do when Jesus presents himself to you? Well, you don't mess around. You don't say, well, I'll get around to it. Well, let me take care of, X, Y, and Z, and then. No. She's about one thing. She's about one thing. She is focused on the Lord, right? Then we hear Martha, burdened with much serving, came to him and said, Lord, don't you care? My sister's left me by myself to do the serving. Tell her to help me. Now, here's the point where lots of people sympathize with Martha. Hey, I get it. There's Mary, just, she's kind of horsing around there. And I got this whole party to prepare, and I got food, and I've got hospitality, and here I'm trying to do my job, and she's, come on, Lord, tell her to help me. Now, listen to the Lord's response. The Lord said to her, to Martha in reply, Martha, Martha, you're anxious and worried about many things. There's need of only one thing. Mary's chosen the better part, and it will not be taken from her. Okay, can I tell you what I think this story does not mean? And especially with our first reading in mind. It doesn't mean, the contemplative life is better than the active life. Mary stands for prayer and stands for liturgy and all this, and Martha stands for this kind of busy active life, and the contemplative life is clearly superior to the active life. Now, I know that interpretation has been given up and down the centuries. I don't think that's what it's about. And one of the signs is Abraham in that first reading, man, he's fussing around with lots of hospitality, fetching water and preparing the meal, and he's like Martha, isn't he? He's very involved in hospitality. So you say, okay, well, what's at stake here? What is the issue? Listen again to the Lord. Martha, Martha, you are anxious and worried about many things. All right, this is life, right? We can all identify with her. Right now, as I record these words, I'm thinking about the day ahead of me, which has a lot to do with the governing this diocese of Winona, Rochester. I'm thinking about a trip I have got to make. I'm thinking about preparations I have to do for talks. I'm thinking about this meeting I have in Washington in about 10 days. I'm anxious and upset right now about a lot of different things. Well, that's life. The problem is when we become monomaniacally focused on all the little things that are preoccupying us. We're split, we're divided, we're worried about this and that. I've talked to you about the the monkey mind, right, that leaps from branch to branch. Well, there's kind of a version of that. I'm worried and anxious about many things. Mary has chosen, and I've always loved the Latin of this, the unum necessarium. That means the one thing necessary. What's that? God and the love of God. When God comes into your life, God makes himself present. That's what your whole life is about. Your whole attention should be focused on God. God, listen now, cannot become one of the many things that you're worried about. See, that's a metaphysical mistake. If I say I'm worried about this, about that, about this person, that person, about this thing, this trip, and so on, and I'm worried about God, what have I done? I've made God into some being in the world. So one of my many preoccupations. God, we say, with Thomas Aquinas, is the sheer act of to be itself. That's to say, that which creatively undergirds and gives rise to all of reality. He's not one concern among many. God is the unum necessarium, the one thing necessary. Now watch. When I am completely focused on God in this intense way, I've not left behind the many things. Rather, I place the many things in their proper context and framework. Martha is the splintered soul, the splintered self, and she's flitting from flower to flower and from worry to worry, anxious and upset about many things. Mary has chosen the unum necessarium. So now she's in a position to handle the many things. See, I'm not playing one off the other, like that's good, that's bad. No, as Augustine said, love God and then love everything else for the sake of God. Now you got it. Now you got it. Now you brought Martha and Mary together. Love God. Unum necessarium. God appears, you run, you worship, you serve. God is the one thing necessary. And in that very move, now all the many things I'm concerned about find their proper place. Look, we're all sinners. And so what happens to us is, oh, I'm so worried about this. I'm so worried about that. Now I'm worried about this. Oh yeah, and there's that coming. And before I know it, I'm a basket case of nerves because wherever I look, there's something to concern me. How about I'm focused on the unum necessarium? Okay. Only in God is my soul at rest. There's the interior castle. There's the place of peace. And from that serenity of soul, I can now find the right attitude toward all the many things that preoccupy me. I think that's a way to read Martha and Mary together in light of Abraham, right? He's fussing around with lots of activity, but all of it is grounded in his complete focus on God and the things of God. And God bless you.
Hey everybody, it's Bishop Barron. I just finished another, I must say, long day at the Synod. They are kind of long days. You go all morning, a little break in the afternoon, then you go for about 3 hours straight. And it was all speeches today from the Synod Fathers, but a lot from the young people, which was really interesting. They largely spoke in the, what they call the free intervention period. So it was interesting. I had my name in, actually, on the list to speak in the free intervention, and I was going to talk about the use of the new media and going after the nuns, and I've talked about that category a lot, the NONES. So I was going to make the observation that a lot of our language, I think, still in the Synod, would probably be opaque or unintelligible to a lot of the nuns. People who have just wandered totally away from religion, and that we have to find new ways to get into their space. And I was going to make the further observation. The good news is we have this, through God's miraculous providence, this opportunity through the social media to reach precisely into that world of those who wouldn't, darken the doors of our institutions. So I was going to say to the bishops, I think that's something we should really put our time and money and effort into, is cultivating teams, both clergy and lay, of crackerjack apologists and evangelists who know the faith, know the culture, and know the social media. Anyway, so you're getting the speech I was going to give in there, and they never got around to me. But I do think that's an important part of our accompaniment of the young. Okay, keep praying for us. We still have a long way to go in this synod, and we'll pray for you. God bless you.
Welcome back to the Word on Fire show. I'm Brandon Vaught, the host of the show, and joining us is His Excellency Bishop Robert Barron. Bishop Barron, welcome.
Hey, Brandon. Always good to be on with you.
A couple episodes ago, I introduced you as His Eminence, and we got all these emails saying like, "Oh, did you guys hear something that we haven't heard yet?"
Oh, yeah.
I'm like, yeah, that's how
I'm
we
rocketing up the hierarchy as we speak.
And that's how we break the news, through a coded introduction on the podcast. Listen, what's been going on? I know you started confirmation season. How's that been going?
Well, that's probably the big news of this time of year in LA. We do all the confirmations pretty much in the months after Easter. And once that season kicks in, it pretty much takes up all your time. As we record these words, it's a Monday. I had a confirmation Friday, 2 on Saturday, 2 on Sunday. I've got 1 tonight and then 1 tomorrow night. So it'll be 7 confirmations in 5 days. But that's typical this time of year. Now, I kind of like the fact in LA that we get them over all in one intense period. I kind of like it that way. But I must say, some days it is exhausting when you're finishing your second confirmation of 100 and some kids, But generally, I like confirmation season a lot. I enjoy going out to the parishes and seeing these young people and trying to get them. Like tonight, I'm going to go down to the St. Bonaventure Mission in Ventura, which was founded by Junipero Serra. And what I'm going to talk about, I'll do something new tonight about Serra and bringing the faith to this part of the world. And to say to these kids, hey, we're passing the torch on to you. The people that brought the faith here 200 some years ago, it's been passed on steadily, and now to you to defend the faith and spread the faith, and you're confirmed. And so anyway, see, part of it, Brandon, I get sick of hearing my own homily. So when you've got 37 confirmations, you can't give the same homily every night. I mean, I do a number of standard ones, and they're okay, but I get sick of them. So I try to come up with new ones.
Good. Well, in this episode, we're going to talk about a new development there in your state of California that I know a lot of the bishops there are pretty concerned about. You just had a big meeting to talk about this new development, and you've been writing a little bit about it. But what I'm talking about is California Senate Bill 360. Okay, so just a quick background on this. This is a proposed bill. So this is not a law. It's not something that's been settled yet. It's a proposed bill that seeks to force priests to report any crimes of sexual abuse that the priest learns about in the confessional. Okay, so if somebody, go ahead, you want to add a clarification?
That's the point of differentiation, because in California, as in many other states, priests are already what we call mandated reporters. So along with like teachers and coaches and many other categories, priests are mandated to report any suspicion of child sexual abuse that comes to their attention. So if I hear about it or someone comes to me, so that's already on the books, and the church has no quarrel with that. But we've always had in California, as in many other states, all the other states really, an exemption for confession. I think in California they call it like a penitential conversation, is exempted from this. Because what's problematic here, Brandon, is if this law passes, now a priest who hears of the sexual abuse of a minor in the confessional will be legally obligated to report it. And that's directly repugnant to the law and practice of the church, which holds to the inviolability of the seal of confession. So that's the point of contention here.
Okay, we're going to get to all the implications of this particular law, but first let's talk about confession. I think most Catholics understand the basics. I go in there, I confess my sins, and then the priest in the name of Christ absolves me of all of these sins. But relevant to this particular bill, help us to better understand this sacrament, especially talk about the seal of confession and why that's so important.
Well, put it first in a general context, that Catholics are a sacramental people. So the grace of Christ, and Aquinas would say it's because we're not angels. We have both souls and bodies, right? So the soul responds to the kind of the verbal, the intellectual, the conceptual, but the body responds to the physical signs. Because of that, Aquinas argues that we have a sacramental system. The grace of Christ comes to us in these sacraments, which are always a hybrid of what he calls form and matter, right? They're always a hybrid of the intellectual, the conceptual, the verbal, and the material. So whether it's the species of bread and wine at Eucharist, it's the water at baptism, it's the oil at confirmation. In confession, the words of absolution, that's the formal side, but then the imposition of hands, the voice of the confessor, that's the material side. So that's the general context, that the grace of Christ is made available to us in these sacramental signs that are hybrids of both form and matter.
Okay, and talk to us about the seal of confession. When somebody comes to you as a priest, I've always found this interesting that confession is different than, say, spiritual direction, where in spiritual direction, if I meet with a priest, monthly, each month he can say, hey, we're talking about this same thing that you've brought up the last 3 months. It seems there's a pattern, but confession, nothing leaves that confessional, not only verbally, but even in the mind of the priest, that there's a seal around this particular confession that seals it from all space and all time.
We want there to be absolutely no obstacle to someone seeking the forgiving grace of Christ, right? So if that grace in the ordinary sense is made available through this sacrament, we don't want anything to stand in the way of that. And one of the most significant obstacles would be the fear that what I disclose in the confessional will now be made public, right? As I was saying before, in baptism, it's Christ who baptizes through the instrumentality of the minister. In confession, the same thing. It's Christ who hears and offers forgiveness through the instrumentality of the priest. We don't want anything to stand in the way of that privileged encounter with the grace of Christ, which is why the church, as you say quite rightly, has surrounded confession with this absolute seal of secrecy. It's to give people access to the grace they need. That's the reason. Let me tell you a story. When I was studying my 4th year in the seminary, we had a practical course in confession. So we did practice confessions, that sort of thing, But the teacher, and it was burned into my soul. I've never forgotten it in 33 years of priesthood. He said, if someone asks you, Father, could you hear my confession? The answer is always yes. If it's inconvenient to you, the answer is yes. If it's dangerous to you, the answer is yes. If it's putting your life in danger, the answer is yes. See? But then he added, once the confession has happened, your attitude must be, it didn't happen. It didn't happen. And if someone, he went on, if someone inquires, oh, what happened in that confession? The answer is, it didn't happen. It didn't happen. Now, if saying that, say it. I mean, it's like that's your attitude is, it didn't happen. If that attitude is dangerous to you, it didn't happen. If that attitude puts your own life in danger, it didn't happen. That's how seriously we take confession, both the access to it and then the privacy that surrounds it. Both are absolute for us.
One thing that's struck me, I've heard this from so many of my priest friends, is that when you talk to priests or bishops across every spectrum, theologically, spiritually, whether they're super pious or fairly lax, every single one of them respects the sacredness of the seal of confession. It's like that one element is held with so much value, no matter what else is going on in the priest's life.
It's funny, Brandon, you say that because it's an observation that, wasn't it Ronald Knox made it? I think it was Knox, that the church, with all of its corruption and all of its sin and all of its failures on the part of its leadership, but what's the one thing which has weirdly remained absolute and consistent over 2,000 years? Do this in memory of me. Is oddly, the Mass has endured, despite all of our weakness and all of our stupidity and everything. But yet that command of the Lord, do this in memory of me, has not faded away. We still do it in memory of him, And I think you're right. There's in a similar way that priests, no matter where you are on the ideological spectrum, it's just central to our priesthood that confession is so sacred as to be inviolable. Pope Francis talks about the field hospital. Well, the confessional is one of the main operating theaters, if you want, of that field hospital of the church. When people are coming to be cured, that's where they come. They come to the sacrament of reconciliation. And so don't put up any obstacle to it. Don't frighten anybody away from it. That's our perspective.
Okay, now let's transition back to this proposed bill. Again, this is California Senate Bill 360. I think it's coming to the floor for discussion there in the California Senate. So not a law, not a done deal. It may not even come to be, but let's talk about its implications if it does pass. So I think there's a lot of Catholics, maybe even in California, who would hear about this and would say, okay, I totally get the sanctity of the seal of confession and all that, but can't we just make an exception for this one particular case of when people either confess that they've abused children or they were abused by someone else? Can we make an exception for that? What do you say to that kind of reasoning?
No. No, but I'm serious. That's the right answer is no. Murder is a terrible thing. Mass murder is even worse. Rape is a terrible thing. Go through the whole gamut of sins. I mean, so once you start down that road of like, well, isn't child abuse terrible? Well, yeah, of course it is. Of course it is. But there's a whole slew of behaviors that are terrible. But I'm not going to say, well, therefore, I'm going to come to the police with what I hear in the confessional. That violates this higher, more sacred justice, which is the reestablishment of a right relationship between Christ and one of his members of his mystical body. So the answer is no.
That sort of slippery slope argument strikes me too, that I think most of us would agree child abuse is either the worst or one of the worst possible crimes. But
sure.
On what principled basis do we just kind of stop there? Why not require priests to bring forth any crime revealed in the confessional?
Right. And then, I think the next step to take here is I've been talking now as a Catholic, right? But I'm also going to speak as an American because the First Amendment, which is so sacred, the first of the Bill of Rights, gets in the way, yes, of the establishment of an official religion. So our founding fathers, I think, very wisely saw that. We don't want an official religion. And if I can put it this way, that's holding off the possible aggression of religion toward the civil state. That religion now takes over the civil state. Our founding fathers, I would say quite rightly, didn't want that. I'm not a theocrat. I don't want a theocracy in the United States. I like that requirement. However, the second clause, right, of the First Amendment, that the government shall make no law prohibiting the free exercise of religion. Well, there's the flip side of it. What's that holding off but the aggression of the state toward religion? So they saw quite wisely it cuts both ways. We don't want an excessively aggressive religion, and we don't want an excessively aggressive state that will now interfere not just with the beliefs of people, but with the free exercise of their religion. As I read this SB 360, Brandon, it's an egregious example of the state interfering very aggressively in the interior life of the church, how the church understands its own sacramental theology and discipline. And so I would construe this as one of the most remarkable violations of this civically sacred principle of the freedom of religion. And again, talk about slippery slopes. I mean, once we start down that road of the state kind of monitoring the religious practice of the various faiths, we're in some serious danger in the direction of totalitarianism. And that's a way to define totalitarianism, is the movement of the state into every aspect of life. I love the fact that alongside of government, we have a whole range of institutions that mediate between the state and the individual. And one of the primary ones would be the religions. When the state begins to overstep all this and to gather everything under its own aegis, watch out. That's the totalitarianism that the church fathers, the founding fathers, feared.
What do you say to this sort of objection when it comes to that clause of the First Amendment, which says that Congress shall make no law prohibiting the free exercise of religion? Some people might say, well, there are certain religious practices that are just so egregious, maybe human sacrifice or,
Sure.
Genital mutilation. Where do we draw the line between the religious practices that should be allowed and those that the government should curtail?
Yeah, well, I think, and those are obvious examples. If someone said, "Hey, it's my religion that a virgin should be sacrificed every Saturday," well, of course, the civil state intervenes to prevent that. That's what they'll do. They'll use that kind of form of argumentation here. But I just think reasonable people see that distinction. That sure there are extreme examples, I suppose, of religious. But the very fact, Brendan, that this thing has been on the books of our country for 200 years or more, that they've respected the integrity of the confessional all these years. I think it's very special pleading to say that, oh, this is an example of, a human sacrifice or something. So no, it's not an absolute as though, hey, it's my private religion, that I can run around, naked every Tuesday in the public square. Well, no, sure, of course. But I don't think any reasonable person sees that there's a even proportionate analogy between those two cases.
Yeah, I agree. And I think what also bugs me about this bill is it doesn't seem to accomplish its stated goal of, say, reducing the amount of childhood sexual abuse. Because I'm thinking if you're an abuser and you want forgiveness from God, but this bill has gone through, it's become law, and it's now required that if I confess this to a priest, he's going to tell the authorities, all that's going to do is keep me from going to confession. It's not really going to stop anything, and it's going to prevent innocent people from being able to confess their sins to priests. So I don't think it even moves the needle on the question of sexual abuse.
It does almost no good and does an enormous amount of harm. I think that's quite right. And show me the very clear, compelling evidence that lots and lots of young people would have been protected if we had this in place. I think that's a very hard case to make. And I would say the burden of proof, given our history around the First Amendment, lies powerfully on the side of those that want to change this. But it would certainly invite chaos in our confessional practice and would cause enormous problems overnight for priests. Now, here's the reason. If this law goes through in California, now what happens overnight to every priest in California? You're between the rock and the hard place. The rock of federal or of prosecution and the hard place of excommunication. Because in the canon law of the church, a conscious violation of the seal results in automatic excommunication. So overnight, every priest in California would have that awful option. Either the danger of prosecution and I suppose imprisonment or excommunication. Which one's is going to be? So that we're being compelled onto the horns of that dilemma is unconscionable.
Okay, we've kind of talked around the issue from several different angles, but suppose you were standing up in front of legislators and they say, hey, you're a priest, you're a bishop, tell us why you think this penitential exemption should stay in place. Why should we allow you to keep this seal of confession?
Because of the First Amendment. I mean, if I were arguing with legislators, I would perhaps explain, as I did just a few minutes ago, what confession means to Catholics. But I think in a secular, purely political context, I'd appeal to the First Amendment. And this is a very powerful violation of the right to the free exercise of religion. And that it does indeed put us on a very slippery slope. I'd also argue this, Brandon, I think, that for some time now, the civil state has been aggressing our public institutions. Think of now Catholic schools, universities, hospitals, how the secular state, especially around sexual issues and transgender issues and abortion and contraception, has been trying to compel us to do things in our own institutions opposed to our principles. So that's been happening already at the public level. This bill, it seems to me, is reaching even more aggressively into the inner life of the church. So now into the confessional itself, into the way we construe our own sacramental practice. There's that creeping totalitarianism that worries me as a Catholic, but also as an American. It worries me. Is this aggression on the part of the state? I think I might argue with legislators along those lines. but also having explained how central this is to Catholics.
All right. Well, this is a little speculative, and I don't want to spend too much time on this because we don't know how this is all going to play out. But just suppose that this bill passes, it gets to the governor's desk, he signs it, it becomes a law. Now, many people think even after it becomes a law, it will likely be challenged and perhaps overturned in courts, that it won't actually survive to take effect.
It's all possible.
Just suppose it goes through and that this is the law of the land, at least in California. You're a bishop, you're a priest. What do you do?
Yeah, and here, I'd caution prudence, because as you say quite rightly, we're at a very preliminary stage of the process. This is not even on the books yet. My fervent prayer is that this thing gets blocked at whatever level. And so I think we take it step at a time and see, what's possible. But I think the bottom line, Brandon, is a priest can't violate the seal of confession, period. If the state is compelling us to do that, then we have to resist. If the state is doing something that is repugnant to the deepest convictions of the church, we have to resist it. Now, it's similar to you're a Catholic doctor, and if the state is compelling you to perform abortions that are repugnant to your conscience, what do you do? Now, that's what they're testing in court all the time, those cases. Or the HHS stuff with the contraception mandate and all that. So it's a similar situation there. It seems to me, though, we can't compromise on this. What should we do even now? It seems to me, not just Catholic priests who are most immediately in danger, but all the Catholic faithful. You're a Catholic in California, and you're seeking the forgiveness of your sins through the confession. This is making this highly problematic for you. I think Catholics need to be roused to political action and ask some serious questions about how we're voting and who we're putting in office, and what we can do as a body politic to oppose ourselves to these proposals. So I'd like to see the church kind of roused around this issue.
Let's close with a quote, a famous quote that your great mentor, Cardinal Francis George, gave a few years before he died. At the time, many people thought this was just dramatic overstatement, but he said, "I expect to die in my bed," which he did. "My successor will die in prison, and his successor will die a martyr in the public square. His successor will pick up the shards of a ruined society and slowly help rebuild civilization, as the church has done so often in human history." Now, I think at the time, people thought it was so unlikely that priests or bishops would ever actually go to prison here in America, but should we read that quote any differently now in light of these sorts of developments?
It's a beautifully crafted quote, and it reflects Cardinal George's eloquence. But I can tell you this, Brandon, having sat at the table with him many times, he knew exactly what we're talking about. He saw it coming very prophetically. He saw the aggression, the increasing aggression of the secular state, and he had no illusions about it. He was a proud American, but he saw the shadow side of what's been happening to American democracy the last 50 years. And he did see that there was a collision course between at least the tack being taken by many people in our political situation now and the church. He also had a keen historical sense of how this has happened over and over again in the history of the church. Sometimes the church and the civil society walk, in lockstep. Think of times during the Middle Ages, although not every time in the Middle Ages. Often popes and princes clashed. Sometimes there's tension. Other times there's outright hostility. Think now Thomas More. Think of Maximilian Kolbe. Sometimes the state becomes so aggressive toward the church that the only answer is martyrdom, and hence his example of his second successor dying at the end of a rope. So he's being eloquent, maybe a little melodramatic, but that's born of someone that knew a lot about American history and the trajectories within it, and a lot about the history of the church and how culture and religion relate to each other. Now, again, I don't want to over dramatize it. I don't, so I'm expecting now priests to be hanged in the public square. But the issue that he put his finger on is a real issue. And therefore, we've got to be vigilant.
That sound means it's time for our question from one of our listeners. We love hearing from all of you who listen to this show. If you have a question, visit askbishopbarron.com, record your question, and we might choose it for a future episode. Today we hear from Nick in Pittsburgh. He's got a good question about confession and absolution. So here's Nick's question.
Hi, Bishop Barron. This is Nick from Pittsburgh, and my question pertains to absolution in the sacrament of reconciliation. Is a priest ever permitted to withhold absolution to a penitent during the sacrament? And if so, under what conditions would this be permissible? Thank you, Bishop Barron, and God bless.
Yeah, thank you for that question. The answer is yes. Within the confession, we typically ask the penitent to pray some version of the act of contrition. Well, that's not just window dressing. See, that's accomplishing two basic things, because to receive absolution, you have to demonstrate to the satisfaction of the judge, and I'm using that language on purpose, that the confessor, to a degree in the confessional, acts as a judge. You have to make it clear to the judge that you are contrite for the sins you've confessed, and you have a firm purpose of amendment. Otherwise, you're kind of playing around with it. Otherwise, it's a velleity, like, oh yeah, I guess I've done some bad things, but I have no real contrition. I don't really feel this is that sinful, and I don't have any desire or purpose to amend my life. So if those two things are lacking, and if a confessor judges that, sure, he shouldn't give absolution. But that's not. I'm not like over dramatizing something. It's just that's a kind of normal bit of confessional practice, is that you discern, and sometimes you can discern it just in a tone of voice. You discern it in someone's attitude, that they feel contrite over their sin and they have a purpose to amend their life. Otherwise, you shouldn't give absolution.
Well, thanks for the question, Nick, and thanks so much for all of you for listening to this show. I wanted to give a special shout out to a handful of our supporters on Patreon. If you want to help support this show, just go to wordonfireshow.com/patron and join many of these great people, including Matt Jungel, Myra Brown, Melanie Brooks, Olga Ramirez, Paul Kyle, Rosa Kim, Sua and Jenna Coe, Sylvia Jean and Jacques Bergeron, Trish Keller, and Kyle Davis. Sorry if I butchered your name, but thank you so much. Thank you for supporting this show. We are so grateful for you for helping to get this show out to many more people. Also,
Brandon, I still need a new chair. This is still that chair.
We ordered you one. That's the big announcement. Yeah, so the chair's coming. A lot of people have been asking about that. Yeah, so
no, it's still very uncomfortable, this chair.
Thanks to all of our patron supporters for the new chair coming from Bishop Barron. Also, don't forget, get your copy of Bishop Barron's new book. We talked about it last week, Letter to a Suffering Church. Pick it up at wordonfireshow.com/letter. Free copy for one, or $1 per copy for multiple. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next week on the Word on Fire show.